Thanks for joining us for a very unique conversation. I usually produce programs like this rather than host them, but it is a supreme honor to be here with you this evening. And thanks to you all for being here. I'd like to start by stating what is perhaps the core problem in our country. We still have 17 veterans killing themselves every single day, a number that hasn't changed in over a decade. Twice the number of vets have killed themselves as those who died in Vietnam. And it's not just about Vietnam. The VA treated 6 million vets in 2024. 14 out of every 100 men and 24 out of every 100 women were diagnosed with PTSD. So to begin, I'd like to start with the naming process itself. As we saw in the film, this condition has had many names throughout history, including soldier's heart, shell-shocked, combat fatigue, and since 1980, we have post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Let's start with you, Ed. Has renaming this complex condition, post-traumatic stress disorder, served us well?
Shakespeare famously asked, "What's in a name?" And the answer is everything. Everything. Names are really important. Words and names carry the worldview of the culture that they come from, and they direct our responses to any situation. So, look, this holiday that we're honoring today is Veterans Day. Well, it was Armistice Day till 1954. Armistice Day was a day to work for and hope for world peace and the end of war. Now, Veterans Day is a time for patriotism to honor our veterans, but we're not thinking about the end of war. Uh,
Hmm.
Also, right now, the Defense Department has just been changed to the War Department, and we see how that allows our government to take actions, aggressive actions that are warlike. We're not defending our country with these actions. So, really, names are everything. And PTSD is a modern social scientific, quasi scientific name for this wound that has been known and recorded since ancient times. The oldest poem we have on the planet is the Epic of Gilgamesh from Sumeria, like 4 or 5 thousand years old. What we call PTSD and moral injury is throughout that poem. Read that, and we realize how universal these are. Uh, the wounds in the Bible, King David and King Solomon both had these wounds. In my book, Warriors Return, I actually did case studies um, demonstrating the pain they carry. Saul killed himself. David wrote the Psalms. Reread the Psalms as PTSD poems. They are in anguish about how David is being torn apart by the suffering that he saw and caused. Um, and he used prayer, a spiritual path, to project himself out of that pain. So that's part of our message too, is that we need a spiritual path. Doesn't matter what it is, it does matter that you walk it with utmost sincerity. The Lakota call this name, their language, Napeapi, which means the spirits left. So what do? Their medicine people help restore the warrior spirit that's been emptied through combat. So yes, names are really important, and ours have devolved to be more and more clinical, more detached, less demonstrating the pain that our good warriors carry.
Thank you. Thank you. Shira, would you like
I
to comment on any of
I
that?
would love to. I think that naming things absolutely matters, and I think that naming things allows us to recognize that we can identify with that suffering, right? And so it allows us to organize some of the symptoms, some of the things that we've been experiencing in a way that really captures that. And I think when you are suffering with stigma and when you're suffering with symptoms, a name is a way to categorize and say, this is what I'm experiencing. So I think with both PTSD and with moral injury, lights can really go off for people when they see that in a name and can relate to that. So I think that naming is very important.
How about you, AJ, as an Iraqi and Afghan war vet? In your case, in the case of your buddies, did PTSD naming help people with their condition? Uh,
Um, PTSD naming sometimes had a bit of a negative connotation to it. but most of us responded much more positively when we heard about the term moral injury. It seemed to capture kind of what we were experiencing inside and what we experienced downrange much more fully than the clinical diagnosis.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Lawrence? Can you speak about your experience being diagnosed with PTSD, the benefits and dangers with the diagnosis?
Sure. Like Levy, I denied it for over 50 years. And it wasn't till, and the way I denied it was through drugs, alcohol, excessive escaping into sex. And I didn't think there was anything wrong with me.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2 weeks after Ed and the group got back from Vietnam in 2017, there was a fire here in Ventura County, Thomas Fire. And when they called for a mandatory evacuation, I left. And then I was sitting in a friend's house half a mile away. And I said, well, what am I doing here? I'm a warrior. You know, I run to the danger. Am I going to sit here and let my house burn down? So I ran back and I fought the fire all night long. Finally, with the help of the fire department, we saved my house. So a few weeks later, I'd been working really hard trying to, the irrigation system was destroyed and I was acting really strange. And my wife and my cardiologist were saying, you need to get diagnosed, go to behavioral health and get diagnosed by my Medicare provider. And I kept saying, there's nothing wrong with me. And then one day when we had to leave the house, they were doing all this work. I had my dog out in the field and he tripped in a gopher hole. I took him to the vet and I said, you got to be really careful with him. He's in a lot of pain. The vet lifted him up on the table. The dog screamed like a human. And I saw him, I wanted to jump up and I saw my hands around the veterinarian's throat. And I wanted to kill him. And so we're walking out of the office and I told my wife, I'm never going back to that vet and I need help. Mm-hmm. So I went to my behavioral healthcare provider and they diagnosed me with continuing PTSD. And I didn't think about it. It was just a few weeks later. Wait a minute. I've had this PTSD for over 50 years. And all that acting out I did was trying to obliterate it. So I think the biggest breakthrough for me is that breaking through that denial that there was anything wrong.
Yep. Was that a relief?
A huge relief.
A huge relief, yeah.
A huge relief for me, yes.
Thank you for sharing that. Let's move to this term moral injury, a condition that's now been acknowledged by the VA. In 2025, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, expanded the category they were using of religious and spiritual problem to include moral, religious, or spiritual problem. So, Shira, I've heard that you and the VA have led the way in the research of moral injury, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And so from your years of research, as well as the growing scientific literature, can you please define moral injury for us?
Absolutely. So moral injury occurs when you do something, you fail to do something, or you witness something that goes against your morals and values. As a result of that, people might have thoughts like, I don't deserve to be happy. And then what follows is typically guilt, shame, and the inability to self-forgive. So as you can see, there are, moral injury can affect your psychological well-being, your emotional well-being, and your spiritual well-being specifically.
Mm-hmm. So what about religious and spiritual problems? How are they connected to moral injury?
So I think that if we think about moral injury on a continuum, that could be really helpful. So at one end is moral problems, right? And so there are a number of people who might face moral problems, but those problems don't necessarily always develop into moral injury, right? So at one end of the continuum are moral problems. The other end, in the middle, is moral distress. So you may feel okay about those problems, you may feel not okay about those problems. When you feel some distress, you've moved along the continuum, but you may not have ongoing problems. that occur because of the moral struggles or the moral dilemmas that you face. And then all the way at the end of the continuum is moral injury. So moral injury occurs when you have ongoing functional and symptoms related to that moral problem.
And this is really different than PTSD, is it not? Can you speak briefly to the obvious differences?
So I think moral injury is not a diagnosis. So as we heard from AJ earlier on, it's something that occurs, and as you spoke about, it's viewed by the DSM now as an issue requiring further clinical investigation, right? And so we really want to understand moral injury better, but it's not a diagnosis like PTSD is. So I think a big part to remember is that there can be some overlap between people who are experiencing PTSD and moral injury, but they are two separate concepts, right? And so that's very important to kind of keep in mind. More specifically, if we think about PTSD, you can go to your doctor, you can be diagnosed with PTSD. That is not the case with moral injury. So PTSD, you may have re-experiencing symptoms like nightmares. You may avoid reminders of your trauma. And you may also have arousal. So you may have insomnia and you may have, startle response. Those are all the pieces that make up PTSD. And that's very different than crossing a line and having guilt and shame related to that. So two separate issues.
Thank you for that. Yeah. Let's go to you, Ed, here, because it seems you were way ahead of the curve, starting over a decade ago, identifying and working with veterans with moral dilemmas and moral distress. We certainly see that in the film. How would you describe the importance of naming moral injury and the VA's willingness to now give moral problems more consideration?
Well, first, I'd like to say that I have seen moral anguish in our veterans from the first veteran I ever worked with. So it's not 10 years ago. I've been doing this for 50 years. And I heard, experienced moral anguish and pain from the very beginning of this work. The Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician who's called the father of modern medicine, said, so 2,500 years ago, he said, all illnesses begin in the soul and end up in the body. And that's the perspective I take, that I defined PTSD, since we use that acronym, as post-traumatic soul distress and post-traumatic social disorder, to focus on what the invisible wound is in its deepest sense and what it's trying to ask us to portray, to pay attention to. Socrates and Jesus, the soul is the center of our being, and our morality sits there. And so I really believe and affirm, and I've experienced all these half century of work, that the moral conflict, the soul wound, is in the core of the experience, and it manifests through all of our symptoms and through PTSD. And so I think of PTSD as what's embedded in the body and the nervous system, but the moral injury, the soul wound, is in the core and crying through our symptoms for attention and relief.
Levy, how about yourself? Can you tell us about your experience with realization around this term moral injury?
Well, I hadn't really heard the words moral injury or it never stuck with me for sure until I met you guys, and I got to thinking about it, and I had remembered that on Hill 724. Mind you, I'm 21 years old, and I'm standing there. I mean, the battle has pretty much been quelled, and I'm looking out there, and I'm thinking, for me to be killing all these people, I must hate them. And I looked into my heart, and I said, I can't find hate. I really looked there, and the only thing that I could really come up with is survival.
So hearing the word moral injury as you were, in a sense, sort of opened a door for you.
Totally. I mean, I look at so many things now. I mean, watching the film, and I can see the pain and suffering that that other veterans have. I mean, one of my experiences in Vietnam was there were a few guys, that kind of wanted to see what it was like to kill somebody, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you'd have a wounded person, and they would go ahead and shoot them just so we didn't have to carry them anywhere. And they all were really, really messed up. I mean, they never could really recover from that. And I mean, I would talk to them later. I mean, these are some of the guys that I served with, and it really just bogged them down in life, because it's just it's wrong, to murder a wounded person, for sure. I mean, it's another thing to defend yourself, but to just genuinely shoot somebody to see what it feels like. Because I mean, I've had people ask me, "Did you ever shoot somebody?" And it's like, why are you asking me a question like that? I mean, what's the point of that? To watch somebody's fall and their eyes close? And it told me that there are just some people out there that are curious about that, but they sure don't know what the payoff is, because it's terrible.
Yeah.
Shira, would you like to, any response to
Yeah.
Levy's story?
Well, I thank you for sharing that. I think, one of the things that I believe truly is that by hearing stories like this, we can understand moral injury in a deeper way. And I think that, what we tried to do when we were first starting to study the impact of killing is we did focus groups with veterans who had served in many, many eras. And, I think one of the things that kept coming up is how much killing haunted people, right? And back then we didn't have a way to sort of label that like we do now. But I think, another thing that came up is nothing can prepare you emotionally, right, for doing something like that as well. I think that's what Levy is speaking to. So I think that these were things that we heard echoed over and over again from the veterans as well. So, you're not alone. And, I think that the more we talk about this and we talk about how painful it is, the more we can help people. So I appreciate you sharing your story, because that's going to help many other people.
Well, that's a big benefit of this film, is to let me know that I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And that I hope that other people see it that way.
This word moral injury, and that it's related to spiritual problems and religious problems, these seem to have historically been the domain of chaplains, more so than clinical therapists. And we happen to have a chaplain with us, Kevin Turner. Can you talk about this idea of moral injury as a chaplain, and in your own life, how it has been now accepted by the VA on some level? What does that mean for an Army chaplain, that the moral problems are finally being acknowledged?
In some respects, it goes back to the very first question you asked, which had to do with naming things. As soon as you actually name it, you can begin to look at it, research it, categorize it. What you actually find with moral injury, though, is it's kind of a boundary issue. Therapists are somewhat uncomfortable dealing with it, simply because it deals with spirituality or religious or morals, and I don't know that therapists get a lot of training on that. And then you end up with chaplains that feel uncomfortable or unqualified to deal with it, because there are psychological ramifications and behaviors and stuff that go with it. So it kind of hits a gap that, quite frankly, I think chaplains are playing as much of a catch-up game with as therapists are. Trying to figure out how do you actually get your clinical skills up to snuff so that you can actually stay in your lane and be helpful, because it is both. Its roots really are in ethics and the reality of morals and religion. But it manifests itself in the body, as Dr. Tick was talking about. It manifests itself very much in the body.
Yeah. Another word that comes up, we've heard a lot about the word betrayal, especially by military superiors. which would seem to qualify as a moral problem. And often connected to betrayal is the word shame, that emotion that often arises when we act in ways that are against our values or our moral code, causing harm to others. And so how about you, AJ? When you were stationed in Afghanistan, did you suffer from moral injury, or did you have feelings of betrayal or shame? And if so, can you talk about them?
I could speak a little bit about that. We didn't know the term moral injury while we were over there. But, in the Marine Corps infantry, it's the kind of the death and destruction part that's what we do. And we do it well. So that wasn't really the issue. But what caused it to be a problem is when the reasons that we were told why we were doing that became evident that wasn't the case. So that we were, to some degree, kind of abandoned by our chain of command on the ground and left to fend for ourselves. And then we had a constantly changing higher mission that was coming from way back in Washington somewhere. And so when that mission would change and conflict sometimes even with what the mission was a month prior, that's where that you start to experience that moral injury, because you start to understand that the reasons you were told for why you're doing what you're doing don't match up anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting resonance with our Vietnam veterans. Ed, please.
Briefly, thank you. I'm building on what AJ and Kevin just shared. The reason that we serve, the place and why we're doing it is of utmost importance. So we heard Mr. Tiger in the film say, we were just defending our country so we don't have the same anguish that you American veterans have. And this is historically true as well. When we explore different wars of different times and places, the people who were defending themselves felt morally justified. They had to. The people who are attacking and aggressing are the ones who have much more serious moral injury. In the Greek tradition, this is also a spiritual dimension. The Greek tradition has two deities of war. Ares is the god of war. He's the aggressor. He's the berserker. He just wants to be in the fight. As we said, some people want the experience of fighting and killing. Athena was also a goddess of war, only protective. She was a defender and a protector of civilization and its highest values. And if we are defending and have a genuine moral justification for what we have to do, the wound is much, much lighter to carry.
Kevin, you also mentioned experiencing some betrayal while you were in Special Forces. Was there guilt or shame involved in that betrayal? Is it a moral problem for you? And can you talk about that?
To some degree, I can talk about it in as much as I can pull it to mind. I'll be honest. A lot of my PTSD stuff is memory loss. So I pull stuff around the edges and try to make sense of it. But what I had were two levels of things. One was my leadership. They were busy trying to promote their own careers, and as a result of that, they were making decisions that didn't have a whole lot to do with what was going on the ground or the people that we were trying to help or protect. And the other was within Special Forces itself. It sounds a little silly to go, try to earn a Green Beret because of a stupid movie, but that was really foundational for me. And because of that, I held Special Forces, Green Berets in very high esteem. They were the guys with the white hats. And yet what I found on the ground, the reality of that was not necessarily so.
Yeah, thank you. On this issue of moral and spiritual problems, we do see that in the film. And I was very happy to visit that Buddhist temple with Ed and the veterans. We've actually taken that short film clip and we've used it in a new series we have called 7 Ways of Healing a Soldier's Heart. And one of them has to do with the spiritual dimension. So could we have a look at that video segment?
So when we go to Vietnam, we immerse in their spiritual and religious practices. And one major reason that what we can learn from the Vietnamese is that their religious and spiritual traditions actually provide much of the protective and preventive factors against post-traumatic stress disorder. So they teach, practice good karma. And if you believe you've made bad karma, well, that's easy to fix. Open your heart and love everybody and make good karma. We learn that they are a very spiritual people and that they carry the deep traditions, teachings of Buddhism, Confucianism, ancestor worship, and really embodied as living matters. And they tell us that's one of the ways you can heal in your country, by learning and studying the laws of karma and realizing how you were caught in them. So the trick is you got to learn to forgive yourself. And that's where the real challenge is. So finally, regarding religions, it is of utmost importance that all veterans from any wars have some kind of religious or spiritual path. And that includes atheism. Atheism is a very difficult spiritual path because we're responsible for everything we say and everything we believe and for creating the ethical system. The point is we have to have a spiritual journey so that we can carry and transform the war experience that has been traumatizing us into warrior wisdom that we carry as elder spiritual warriors. Immersing in the religion and the practices of the country that we fought in, or the religion they practice even when they're at home, gives us this guidance.
Great. So I want to ask you, Shira, film segments, film clips like this, can they be helpful to vets and their families?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of times what allows us to even have the vet come see us is families and, family members and friends. And so I think by having people witness these kinds of beautiful film clips, they can really see their loved ones reflected and hopefully give their loved one a little nudge to get some help. Much like the stories that we heard. I think the other piece that really stands out to me in the clip we just heard is the key of self-forgiveness. I think that such a big part of healing from moral injury is self-forgiveness. And that can happen in so many different ways. That can happen by talking to a therapist, but it absolutely has to happen in a broader context too. So I think that really is critical, that we have to build bridges, to spiritual leaders. We have to build bridges to the community in which the veteran is embedded. So I think that's what that clip raises for me too.
You mentioned the nudge. I want to ask Anita Bell, did you have to nudge Terry Bell to get help before our trip to Vietnam?
Wow. He was ready to be nudged. He was paralyzed after we were married for several years from a health issue. And so he had a lot of years to reflect. And when he came out of that time of reflection, he found Dr. Tick's book. When he read it overnight, he said he called Dr. Tick right away, and we were at a retreat in a week. So the nudging was, he was so ready. He was in so much anguish and so much pain that he recognized the words, but he knew that he needed a process to get it open. So we did show up on a retreat in New York. And fortunately, that year, Healing Soldiers Heart applied for a scholarship for a family to receive a to go to Vietnam, and it was the right thing, the right time, and it was the perfect way to just catapult, not even nudge. It was to be catapulted back to the scene of the crime.
Yeah.
Thanks, Anita.
Mhm.
Jan, I'm remembering on 9/11, you were an assistant minister in New York City at the Unitarian Church of All Souls, and you were among the clergy who volunteered to be part of the trauma response team at Ground Zero. Can you speak to your observations as to why in and around the grieving of 9/11, why you think the U.S. may have short-circuited the grieving process, and how important that grieving process really is for you,
Sure,
for us
sure,
as a
Stephen.
society?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was at Ground Zero only one night, but I spent a lot of time at the family assistance centers throughout New York City afterwards. But that evening at Ground Zero, you were surrounded by ash, by human ash. It was in the air. And I recall standing sort of close to the edge of what was called the pit and literally praying that this country, the US, would not seek revenge and retaliate over the top against those who presumably perpetrated the violence. And of course, the US did, even though the those who perished were from so many countries. I think it was almost 90 countries. The US invaded Afghanistan. And I would think that there would be a certain moral injury after that on the part of the invaders. From being invaded, we, the US, became the invaders and wreaked havoc. And again, I think it was because we short-circuited the grief. We didn't stay with the grief. It wasn't as if people didn't grieve, but it was as if, you were struck and bing, you had to retaliate. You had to retaliate before you could feel the depth of sorrow and the depth of the horror of what had happened. Because of course it was horrible. Of course it was horrible. But how to respond to that instead of reacting? And we reacted, we didn't respond. So that was the challenge. The stories that came out of it, of those who survived, were extraordinary.
Thank you. So, Ed, do we run away from the grief? Do we want to run away from grieving as a nation?
Yes. Sorry, it's a simple answer, but yes, we do.
What are the costs
We're
of that?
concerned about rehumanization, building on Jan's comments. When we react, we're not thinking, we're not feeling, we're not in our more human and higher traits. We're acting like beasts who are just responding. We're in pain, we're fighting back and causing somebody else pain. We need to be slow and feel our grief, our despair, our confusion, whatever's going on. And as Jan says, respond responsibly and thoughtfully rather than just react as wounded creatures without our higher human functions.
Human functions, yeah. And this makes me think about dehumanization and how that also accompanies war. And we know from Vietnam the use of words like gook and Charlie were so prevalent. We know in World War II the Germans were dehumanizing Jews by calling them rats and lice. And we fast forward 75 years later and we have Benjamin Netanyahu declaring the Israeli Defense Forces will continue to mow the grass in Gaza, referring to his foes being like grass, the dehumanization. So tell me about this dehumanization role, Ed, and is it necessary for soldiers to dehumanize the other in order to kill them? Is that it?
I don't want to be inaccurate or speak out of turn, so I'm not sure now, but at least until very recently, during basic training, the dehumanization process happens. Recruits are dehumanized, hair shaved, past a race, everybody becomes a uniform, a GI, not themselves. So that's dehumanizing to each individual. And in training, I observe bayonet training. Kill, kill, kill. They're not human beings. They're things. They're animals. They're goofs. They're towel heads. Just kill. We don't have to train people that way. Uh, we, in our trips to Greece, when we have circles of American veterans with Greek veterans, they say, we're shocked that you're trained to kill. We're not trained to kill. We're trained to defend and be very cautious if and when we ever use the killing arts. And it must really hurt you, American veterans, to be trained to kill before you're even in a situation where you have to kill. So dehumanization is, we believe that it's necessary. However, world warrior traditions teach that it's not necessary, and that rather, I'm thinking of a Buddhist story where a samurai warrior who had an assignment to kill an assassin of his own lord. When he found the assassin, the man spit in his face, and then he sheathed his sword and walked away. Because as a Buddhist, he was taught never kill for revenge, never kill for personal reasons. It must be for a higher purpose, utterly necessary to protect our society, or else don't do it.
Makes me think, Levy, when you said that you found no hate in your heart for the enemy. So I guess that would indicate that the dehumanization process didn't really work with you. You maintained a human connection to your enemy.
Well, yeah, even that, the thing of it is that some people, I think it's easy to kill somebody. I mean, even if you dehumanize them, you instinctively know inside they're human. It's not something that you can run away with a bad word like, gook or Charlie.
Yeah.
You're killing somebody that looks like you.
I was thinking about the rehumanization, which is clearly part of your trips that you lead to Vietnam. And I know, Lawrence, you took a trip to Vietnam with Ed. Did you rehumanize the enemy? Did you rehumanize the Vietnamese? And was that part of your healing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I've talked about that. There was forgiveness everywhere. But I think the most important thing is by going there and hearing all that forgiveness on their part, and that we're the same, we are warriors and now we're friends, not enemies, is that you can forgive yourself. That's so important, to be able to forgive yourself. Here I was 18 years old, deployed offshore Vietnam. I didn't know anything about myself. And so it's a journey for me, and I'm talking about this in my memoir. It's a journey home to your true self, not just journey home physically, but to here. Who is this person here? And I can't remember who it was in the film said, that wasn't me. And that's the way I feel, being all gun ho and all that. That wasn't me. And, the journey is here, recognizing you can forgive yourself and you're home to who you really, truly are.
Beautifully put. Can we talk about rituals a little bit? Because we've seen in the film these very powerful rituals of Bob and Larry, for example, pouring the water, ritually remembering their fallen friends, and of course Terry, taking his dog tags and dropping them into that makeshift grave. This sort of. Can you talk, Ed, about why you use rituals in your work and the power of rituals as a therapeutic approach?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First, a comment about Terry's spontaneous ritual. That came from Terry. He wanted to return his dog tags and leave them behind.
Yeah.
I remember it's not in the film, but we were protective of him. Terry, are you sure you want to do this? Dog tags are so powerfully symbolic to everybody who served. And he said, It is leaving the old self behind, the self that was dehumanized, and experiencing a rebirth by going into a new identity. So rituals are either orchestrated or spontaneous experiences that facilitate. They're done in community. They're done usually, often with a guide or facilitator, and they're done in a sacred place. So they're all designed as an experience to carry us through from a state of woundedness to healing, from a psychological, psycho-spiritual death to a rebirth through the ritual. So ritual is an intensive experience that is designed to carry us through the transformational process so that we emerge as a new person. Really, we had a wonderful 65th birthday party for Terry after that ceremony. And in fact, it's not in the film, but we adopt warrior names in like the Native American tradition. And when Terry cried, "More came home because of me," we gave Terry the name More Came Home. And he carried that with so much honor and dignity, including, God bless him, he didn't leave any bodies behind. There were no MIA families because of Terry's loving and loyal service. So Moore came home, and he wasn't Moore came home until we had that ritual, and he grieved and released it and let go of the dog tags and made room for a new identity. Ritual can facilitate all of this and more.
And Anita, you were right there with him. Was this as cathartic for Terry as it feels in the film? And what were the ramifications of that new identity?
Well, certainly some of the comments that I think Kevin made about manifesting in the body, and also the symbolism of the soil as it was a foxhole. It was still there. It was the old that Terry got on the edge of, so he was able to truly put himself into that in-between role, which he couldn't reconcile. It was the death that he said was in him, and he had life in him, but he had death, and that all those who, like Levy said, that they had to kill in order to stay alive was irreconcilable for him. And on the edge of that foxhole, throwing the dog tags in, which for some of his guys was like, how could you do that? Well, he knew he belonged. He came here as a spiritual being. He was going to leave as a spiritual being. And that's what he was reclaiming. And that yelling and vomiting and all that was just so painful. So for him, it opened the path to continued reconciliation. And like Ed, you said in the film, that it was the lives broken into millions of pieces and putting them back together and putting the world back together and finding where you fit. That's what it gave Terry, a place and a way to figure out how he fit again, and not just as a warrior. So it was very cathartic, and it continued to be so until his death.
Shira, what do you think? The role of ritual in the healing process?
Yeah, well, I just want to say that to me, More Came Home Because of Me, and that whole scene was incredibly powerful, and I think one of the most powerful moments of the film, because you see community coming together, you see people supporting him, and you see the emotions literally coming out one by one, and that is incredible. And I think that is, the power of ritual. I think, as Ed was saying, I think it's highly, highly individual. So it takes a lot of work to figure out what the right ritual is for every individual. And for a lot of people, I think it is about the grief that many veterans don't get to feel, right? And so I've worked with veterans where the ritual was around having some memory of the people that they've lost, and having, and for each person that's going to be different in how they want to do that. But it's incredibly powerful, and it helps not only with healing, but also with acceptance of what happened to those rituals. So they can be a very important part of the process.
Certainly for Terry, and also for Michael, who was there. Remember, the radio operator who felt like he'd really let down his men, and in the presence of Ed's compassion, really, to remember that he brought so many home, and that Michael, like Terry, saved so many lives.
Yes.
You know.
I want to say something about,
Sure.
I think that that's really important, and I think Lauren's referred to this earlier too, that part of healing is taking the parts of the self, and bringing them together. So, you're a father, you're a husband, you're a warrior, and part of that healing process is recognizing that there are things that you did that you may not be proud of, but you work towards acceptance, and then you integrate those parts. Each of those pieces can come together as a whole, and I think that that's really a huge part of the process, and we can do that through ritual, we can do that through many different ways, but that integration, I think, is so key to healing.
Something else we wanted to talk about is generally I'm calling it spousal support, or spousal and family support. We saw this with our 3 spouses that accompanied us to Vietnam on this trip, and we have our second short video clip on this topic that we'd like to share with you. This is from our 7 Ways of Healing a Soldier's Heart, which is on Instagram, by the way, and Facebook. So please check it out there. Can we see that video, please?
It's not only our veterans that we're concerned with, but all of you partners, spouses, children, everybody living with a veteran, everybody sharing community with a veteran is impacted by the inner toxin the veteran carries. Bob's wife had the courage to come on this journey with him. In fact, there were 3 couples on this journey, and the wives being present to witness their husbands, to support them, to listen to their confessions, and to unify with the Vietnamese people is of utmost importance. Very many veterans will not tell their spouses or their families their stories because they don't want to traumatize the families. They'll hold the stories in, which makes them suffer even more. Whenever we deny or hide our stories, they build pressure inside and they become toxic to us. You see how toxic Bob's stories came, and when we practice confession and absolution, we can finally release all of that poison. And so we must have the love and the courage to witness the stories and realize that once our spouses know who we are, they're going to love us more, not turn away from us because we had such a difficult past. As we heard Bob crying, that wasn't me who did that. We become something else in the combat zone when the berserk takes over. And Bob is rediscovering his own personality. His wife loves him all the way through and knew who he was. And we all spouses and family members must have the open hearts and courage to support and witness their veteran so he can release the stories and open his heart and come home.
So, Shira, can we come back to you on this? If veteran spouses or family members are watching, what role do they play? How can they help?
Yeah, I think they play a critical role. We talked about the nudge before, and I think that it goes way beyond that, because I think that you said the statistics before about suicide, right? And so this is a situation in which we need all hands on deck. So we need family members, we need friends, we need anyone who's watching to help. And so I think, just by understanding there's an issue with moral injury, we can name it, we can assess it, we can treat it. Knowing that that's all true, we need to have everyone help us with this issue. So I want to just speak just for a moment to the issue of suicide. So, what we know from recent studies that my team has done is that the rates of suicide in those with probable moral injury are about 3 times higher for suicidal ideation, about 6 times higher for people who have actually made an attempt for suicide. So this is after already taking into account PTSD and depression and a number of other factors. So we know that for those with moral injury, the rates and the risks are a lot higher. And we have to have all hands on deck to help with that so that, we can save everyone we can and get them the help that they need.
And as Ed has said so powerfully, one of the big jobs is listening to the stories, and in some way, I think our film is so much about, listening to the stories of our four vets, and
Yes.
and we literally see and feel the healing that comes from that listening.
Yes.
Ed, you have so much to say about listening. I want you to add to this, please.
So telling the story is critical. If it's locked inside the veteran, then they're going to suffer and it's going to do uh, quite disturbing things to their inner world. The symptoms that we have are the inner wounds trying to express themselves through the body, and deep listening individually and collectively is absolutely critical. And if our society listened to all of our veterans, if we could have a national listening day and have thousands and thousands of veterans telling millions of us the truth about war and its pain and suffering, things would change. We'd all be changed by that. We'd all be initiated, and we'd all have a different attitude toward the use of violence.
How was it for you, AG, when you came back from Afghanistan? Did your friends, did your family, did people want to hear your stories? Did they want to listen? Were they listening to your stories?
I'm sure they would have listened if I was willing to tell anything, but that was even up until a few years ago. Really wouldn't say much, if anything, and didn't even like to tell people that I was in the Marine Corps at all. So, and I think a lot of friends and family still probably don't know a bunch, but I've let a little bit out since then, and since working with Ed and learning that it can be helpful.
Yeah.
Stephen, can I
Lawrence,
can I
yeah,
address
please.
that? So I came back in late '66. I don't know how, but I managed to find a girlfriend. Somebody would put up with me. But then when I felt getting too close to her, I ran away and I lived in Tucson. I had a miserable time. I came back and I had a lot of suicidal ideation. And I remember thinking, do I want to die? I need to talk to somebody. So I reached out to my 19-year-old girlfriend, and I was afraid to tell my story. So I told her, I said, Linda, I don't want to live anymore. If this is what life is down in this pit, in this terrible depression, I don't see a way out. 19, she said, Larry, I know a therapist. Let's call him tonight. We called him, we got an appointment. I saw him for 3 years, saved my life. So over the years, Lynn and I split up, but we're still friends. This was, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I always wanted to tell her, thank you for saving my life. And every time I would try, she would change the topic. And I went to my wife. I said, Sue, I don't understand. I want to, tell her how much I appreciate her. She says, Lawrence, she heard you. Leave it. She knows that. She doesn't want to talk about it. You got to leave it and just trust her. And that's what I did. So here's a person. I had the courage to reach out to one person, and it was the right person.
We were going to talk about homecoming, and the importance of homecoming for the veteran, and also the society that welcomes veterans back, tries to reintegrate that veteran into societal life. So Ed, tell us about homecoming and tell us about the United States. Are we good at welcoming back our warriors?
No. Simple answer, but the complexity is this. I worked with a Korean War nurse who was Native American, and she was fine because when she returned on the Freedom Bird from Korea, her entire tribe was waiting for her down below. And the elders of the tribe stepped forward out of the tribe and said, You're not going home. You're coming into the wilderness with us for 3 months while we take the war out of you. We're taking the war out of you before we're letting you go home. Bless our veterans and the families. Everybody wants to be reunited with their loved ones as quickly as possible. It's really dangerous because the war is still in them and nothing's been processed, and we haven't been given any of the complex and beautiful rituals and steps for return that traditional cultures give. My I have researched this all over the world, and there are necessary steps of return. Storytelling is one of them. Isolation and tending, affirming your warrior destiny, storytelling, restitution in the community. All these steps, we can understand them. We can develop homecoming programs that guide the veteran through a homecoming and healing process. So we do take the war out. Um, some of us have been in retreats together. My wife, Kate Dalsted, and I ran over 40 retreats all over the country while we were running our nonprofit. The purpose of the retreat was in 4 intensive days to take veterans through all of these necessary steps of homecoming. So again, enter the ritual as a wounded warrior and emerge as a spiritual elder who has left it behind and transformed identity. So there's a lot of good programs that do this. There are talking circles in faith organizations. Our vet centers try to do the job. God bless the VA for trying so hard to do what it the homecoming job for millions of people, but it's really inadequate in the way it does not directly address and give the homecoming its full due, such that homecoming itself, an inadequate, neglectful homecoming, becomes a source of trauma. The people I served and the people I would give my life for didn't help me come home. Here's a beer, here's a turkey dinner. Now get on with life. It doesn't work. So yeah, we need homecoming, and tragically, our nation as a whole does not do a good job. But it is possible, and other times and places and peoples model it well.
I was so happy to hear that your book, Warriors Returned, was translated into Ukrainian and Russian and is actually being used in that war for returning warriors. Can you tell us a little bit about how it's being received there and how people are working with your
Oh,
ideas
goodness,
there?
yes. So, yeah, what the Ukrainian and Russian people have both told me is that they went searching through Western forms of addressing PTSD and moral injury, and they rejected most of our practices because they're behavioristic, they're cognitive, they stay on the surface, they're addressing symptoms, and both these cultures are so deep, so old, with really ancient traditions, warrior traditions, uh, deep and complex mythologies and religious and spiritual traditions. So they said, what will work for us are these forms of entering deeply into the soul space that everyone has, and we're using these kind of practices that really do work with the soul. So it's a great honor to be working with them, to find that um, my small contributions are useful to them, and uh, and as we're talking, I hope and pray that they'll start talking to each other someday soon instead of being
Yeah.
stuck in the war, because they are the same people.
Yeah, there's some hope there. And
Yeah.
we were talking about hope earlier. And I would like to ask, perhaps, Shira, is there hope in this research that you're undertaking? And where is the hope for suffering veterans?
I think there is a tremendous amount of hope. I think the beautiful group that you've brought in here today has echoed over and over again that there are paths forward. There are paths forward to identify, to heal. And I think that there are many many paths forward, right? It's not only one path. Each person is going to have their own path. And so I think if we can hold on to that hope, and if we can start to recognize moral injury in the people, and it doesn't only occur in veterans. I think that's an important point to make. We know that it occurs in many groups of people. Healthcare workers, we saw that during the pandemic, right? First responders, other high-risk groups. So, I think the more we can identify, the more we can actually help people connect with the help that they need to heal. So I'm holding the hope for sure, and I think that that's important for all of us to hope, so we can support each other and support our veterans.
Yeah. I think that's a good grace note to end on. And I hope our audience tonight has learned something from this conversation. I certainly have. It's been a great honor to have you as my guests. Thank you all for joining us from home, and good night.